What if the story you were told about God began in the middle, not at the beginning? What if, long before the name Yahweh was ever spoken, there were other names, sacred names, whispered in the winds of Africa? It's carved into it. Temple walls sung beneath the stars, names that once held power, names that once held truth, and then were silenced. Today, we pull back the curtain on a history that was not lost. It was erased. Because before Yahweh rose, there were gods, black gods, worshipped, feared, and loved by civilizations far older than Israel. They weren't myths. They were real to their people, divine, present, and dangerous, not to humanity, but to the systems of control that came after. And so the story was rewritten. This video series begins with a journey few dare to take back to the original face of the divine. A face that looks nothing like what we've seen in cathedrals, on stained glass, or in Renaissance paintings. A face that has been buried under centuries of conquest, doctrine, and fear. But you're here now, and that means you're ready. Let's start where most spiritual narratives never do, before the Bible, before Yahweh, in the deep spiritual memory of the African continent. In lands like Nubia, Kush, Axum, and Kemet, ancient Egypt, spiritual life wasn't something imported. It was native. It pulsed through the soil, the rivers, the rhythm of the drum, and the breath of ancestors. It wasn't limited to temples. It was in everything. The divine was not distant, white-robed, or foreign. The divine looked like the people. Black skin, coiled hair, noble faces carved in stone. Gods who created, nurtured, judged, healed, and walked among their people. But then, something shifted. As empires expanded, military, religious, colonial, so did their gods. And the older deities especially, those that reflected African features and cosmic balance, were labeled with new names: pagan, idol, demon. Their temples were burned, their symbols defiled, their memory dismissed, and in their place came a singular name, Yahweh. But here's the question that many have been too afraid to ask. Did Yahweh come into a spiritual vacuum? Or did he rise in the middle of a battlefield of gods? Because if you look closely beneath the edits, behind the doctrines, you'll see traces, echoes, shards of something older. Even the Bible hints at a time when Yahweh was one among many, a local tribal god, a warrior deity. So how did he become the only one? The truth is uncomfortable. The rise of Yahweh as the one true God was not just spiritual, it was political. It was strategic. To solidify a nation, to unify a people, you must unify their belief. And so the black gods, those who once reigned across the sands of Africa, had to be buried, not because they were false, but because they were inconvenient. And yet, the memory survived. It survived in whispered prayers, in songs passed down through generations, in the silent ache of people who feel disconnected from the God they've been told to worship, because he looks nothing like them, feels nothing like home. So I ask you, have you ever felt that your spirituality is missing something? That maybe the divine you were taught about isn't the whole story? That deep down something older is calling? If so, you're not crazy. You're remembering. And that's why this video exists. Not to tear down faith, but to expand it. To remember what was taken. To rediscover what still lives inside you. Because before Yahweh spoke, black gods walked the earth, and their stories are not dead, only sleeping. Are you ready to awaken them? If this resonates with you, even just a flicker, comment below, I want to remember what was erased, because your voice matters. And the more we speak, the more the silence breaks. In part 2, we'll reveal the actual names, powers, and legacies of these forgotten deities, and why their erasure wasn't just religious, but revolutionary. Before Yahweh became the centerpiece of monotheistic faith, there were others. They had names, faces, powers. They were not metaphors. They were gods. And their skin, it was dark. Their images adorned temple wall long before the 10 Commandments were carved into stone. Their stories were sung beneath the stars of Nubia, whispered along the banks of the Nile, and invoked in sacred rituals that united body, earth, and spirit. So why don't we know their names? because history was rewritten by the victors. And in this spiritual conquest, silence became the sharpest sword. But today we speak the names they tried to erase. Let's begin with one of the oldest. Amun-Ra. He was not a minor god or tribal deity. He was the god, the hidden one, the breath behind all things. He fused two forces, Amun, the invisible spirit, and Ra, the sun, giver of life. Represented with dark skin, crowned in gold, Amun-Ra was the creator of the universe. He was worshipped long before Yahweh was ever known. And when you compare their titles, the all-knowing, the eternal, the one who is something, becomes clear. Yahweh didn't begin in a vacuum. He arrived in a landscape already echoing with divinity. Then there's Osiris, the god who died and rose again. Sound familiar? He was the deity of resurrection, divine judgment, and eternal life. Often shown with green or black, skin symbolizing fertility and the afterlife. Osiris embodied a sacred cycle, death, rebirth, renewal. A cycle older than Christianity, but strangely mirrored in it. And what about Maat? She was not a goddess you prayed to. Out of fear. She was balance, justice, cosmic order. Her symbol, a feather. In death, your heart was weighed against it. If it was lighter, you passed on in peace. If not, you were devoured. And centuries later, in Revelation, we see a final judgment. Souls weighed, destinies divided. The resemblance is not coincidence. It is continuity with the names removed. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead, prepared souls for the next world. His presence was one of transition, not damnation. He guided, protected, healed. Compare that to angels of judgment in modern texts, and you begin to see shadows of the old world beneath the new. And then there is Isis, the divine mother, protector, healer, sorceress of the sacred. She nursed Horus at her breast, was revered across Africa and beyond. But her image was not destroyed, it was repurposed. Centuries later, Mary, the mother of Jesus, would be portrayed in her pose, holding her child, cloaked in symbols that once belonged to Isis. What changed wasn't the posture. It was the skin, the ancestry, the meaning. Each of these gods represented more than religion. They were identity, cultural memory, the living spirit of entire civilizations. So why were they erased? Because they stood in the way of a new order. The rise of Yahweh, fierce, exclusive, male, and singular, marked the beginning of a theological war. Not just against polytheism, but against the black image of the divine. When Yahweh appears in the Hebrew text, he does not gently invite the worship of one God. He demands it. He commands the destruction of altars. He orders temples torn down. He speaks of other gods as abominations, but never names them. Why? Because naming gives power. Because naming makes the erased visible. Because to say Yahweh replaced Amun-Ra would mean admitting Amun-Ra existed in the first place. Instead, silence, demonization, erasure. And with that erasure came a spiritual wound, a disconnect. Millions today kneel to a God whose origins they do not understand, while the gods of their ancestors lie buried beneath centuries of shame and theological warfare. But the memory persists. It lives in the drum, in dreams, in the pull of curiosity that brings you to this video right now. So I ask you, have you heard these names before? Amun-Ra, Osiris, Isis, Maat? Do they stir something in you? If so, write it in the comments below. I remember the names, because every name remembered is a seed of truth reborn. In part 3, we'll expose how these gods, once sacred, were rebranded as demons, idols, and threats. We'll trace how their temples became ruins and how their followers became colonized, not just in body, but in soul. The gods weren't lost. They were silenced. Let's ask the question no one wants. To answer, how did the gods of life become symbols of evil? Amun-Ra, Osiris, Isis, Anubis, Maat. They were once revered as divine guardians of creation, justice, healing, and the afterlife. They walked beside the people, not above them. Their images were carved in stone, sung in rituals, invoked by priests, and midwives, kings, and farmers alike. So how did these gods become demons? It didn't happen by accident. It was a deliberate spiritual rebranding, a war not just of armies, but of symbols, language, and imagination. When Yahweh emerged in the land of Canaan, he did not appear in isolation. The spiritual landscape was already crowded, rich, ancient, alive. People worshiped Baal, El, Asherah, Dagon, and others, many of whom had roots that reached back into African soil. The Hebrews called them pagan, unclean, detestable. But they never fully explained them. Why? Because if you explain them, you humanize them. You give them history, legitimacy. Instead, these gods were flattened into caricatures. They weren't gods, they were threats. They weren't divine, they were false idols. And anyone who kept their memory alive was worthy of punishment, even death. But let's pause here. Ask yourself, why would a truly divine God need to destroy the memory of others to be worshipped? Why the violence? Why the censorship? The answer lies in power. Spiritual power is cultural power. And to dominate a people fully, you must dominate their image of the divine. If their God looks like them, they are strong. But if their God looks like you, and theirs becomes a demon, then you own not just their bodies, but their souls. This was not just colonization. It was spiritual colonization. Step by step, the transition was made. The sacred drum became a summoning tool for evil spirits. The healer became a witch. The ancestor became a demon. The black god became Satan. Entire cosmologies were compressed into sin. Entire pantheons flattened into heresy. And with that came generations of shame. Let's be honest. How many of us grew up hearing that anything African in origin was witchcraft? That dancing, herbal baths, or ancestral veneration was of the devil? That if it didn't come from Rome or Jerusalem, it couldn't be holy? This wasn't just ignorance. It was programming. Because once you disconnect people from their gods, you disconnect them from their history. And once they're cut off from their roots, they're easier to control. What replaced the old faiths was not more spiritual, it was more institutional. It demanded churches, priests, doctrines, taxes, and submission. It taught people that God lived far away, behind veils and in heaven, not in the river, the fire, the soil, the rhythm of the drum. And with that separation came fear. Fear of disobedience, fear of judgment, fear of themselves. The gods who once empowered people were replaced by a God who punished them. But the memory hasn't died. Not entirely. You feel it, don't you? When the old names are spoken, when the feathers of Mate or the scepter of Osiris reappear in dreams or books or quiet rituals, something inside stirs. It's not fear, it's recognition. Because these gods weren't evil. They were redefined. And now it's time to reclaim them. This doesn't mean abandoning beliefs in Yahweh. It means seeing the full picture, recognizing that spiritual history didn't begin at Mount Sinai. It began long before on the plains of Africa, where people spoke with the divine in their own tongue and saw their reflection in the face of God. So I ask you, have you ever felt ashamed of something spiritual just because it didn't come from a church? Have you ever been told to stay away from symbols your ancestors once embraced? If so, you are not alone. And this video is not just history, it's healing. Comment below, I reclaim what was stolen, because your voice matters. And when one person speaks truth, others remember they are not alone. In part 4, we'll go deeper into the manipulation of imagery, how God became white, and how that image changed the soul of the world. It wasn't just about who we worship. It became about who we see as worthy of being divine. Are you ready? Close your eyes. Imagine God. What do you see? Is it a man? Is he old? White hair? Pale skin? Does he look European? If so, you're not alone. But ask yourself why. Why has the divine, limitless, eternal, omnipresent been reduced to the image of a 16th century European monarch? Why does the Son of God so often appear in paintings with soft brown hair, blue eyes, and features that would be more at home in Rome than in Nazareth? The answer isn't divine. It's political. Because when you control the image of God, you control how people see themselves. The whitewashing of the divine was not just an artistic choice. It was a calculated campaign, one that reached into churches, schools, colonized lands, and colonized minds. It didn't just reshape theology, it reshaped identity. When European empires spread Christianity across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, they brought two things, the cross and the portrait. They taught people to kneel before a savior who looked like their oppressor. And in doing so, they severed the spiritual connection between people of color and the divine. Because if God is white, then whiteness becomes the standard of holiness, authority, and closeness to heaven. And what does that make you? For Black children, this meant growing up with no image of themselves in stained glass, no prophets that looked like their fathers, no angels that resembled their mothers. Instead, they were told, your songs are pagan. Your dances are sinful. Your ancestors were idolaters. Your skin is just a vessel, one that must be saved from its own roots. This is more than psychological. It's spiritual violence. It teaches an entire people, though, the closer they are to their culture, the further they are from their creator. And here's the truth. There is no description of God's face in the Bible. There is no verse that says Jesus had pale skin or flowing brown hair. The Bible was written in a region of dark soil under desert sun among Semitic people, not Scandinavian kings. So where did this image come from? From painters, from popes, from empires who believed that to rule the world, they must first rule heaven's throne. Take the most famous example, the image of Jesus by Cesare Borgia, a European nobleman whose likeness became the model for Christ in Renaissance art. His face, symmetrical, soft, European, was repeated so often it became indistinguishable from the one truth, not because it was true, but because it was useful. It served as a weapon of psychological conquest. Because once the divine wears your face, you don't just represent power, you embody it. Now imagine the inverse. What would happen if God were portrayed with black skin, curly hair, full lips? What if the divine looked like the enslaved, like the colonized, like the forgotten? It would dismantle centuries of hierarchy in a single stroke. And that's exactly why it never happened. Because God wasn't just rebranded to comfort. He was weaponized to control. But here's what they didn't expect. The truth has memory. The soul remembers what the mind was trained to forget. That's why when you imagine a black God, even for a moment, something inside you stirs. Not guilt, not shame, recognition. It's not blasphemy, it's restoration. So now I ask you, really ask you, who gave you the image of God that you carry? Was it chosen? Or was it handed to you with a chain of expectation? And what would happen if you let that image go? Close your eyes again. Now imagine God with your skin, your father's eyes, your grandmother's hands. Do you feel it? That's the divine you were never supposed to see. That's the face they hid from you. But you don't have to live in that blindness anymore. So write in the comments below, I see God in my image, or the divine reflects me too. Let's break the illusion together. In part 5, we'll go further, not just into the image, but into the disconnect. How Black spirituality, one vibrant and rooted in nature and soul, was severed, criminalized, and replaced with silence, and how that silence still echoes in churches today. Are you ready to remember what was yours? What happens when a people are taught to fear their own soul? When their music becomes noise, their dance becomes sin, their rituals become witchcraft, and their ancestors become demons? The answer is silence, but not the peaceful kind. This is a silence that bruises, a silence that severs, a silence that whispers, you must leave yourself to find God. For millions of people of African descent, this silence wasn't chosen, it was enforced. Before the missionaries arrived, before the colonizers brought crosses carved in ivory and laws, written in Latin, Black people already knew the divine. They danced with it, sang to it, breathed with it. Their spirituality was not locked in a building. It was in the soil, the drumbeat, the firelight, the herbs, the body, the breath. It was present. But then came the doctrine. And with it came the doctrine's demand, abandon your gods, your ways, your songs, your names, yourself. And so began the great disconnect. What was once sacred became suspicious. What once healed became heresy. What once united became divided by fear. They didn't just strip spirituality from Black culture. They replaced it with shame. Imagine this, a young Black woman stands in church, her heart full of praise, but every image around her is white. Every angel, every saint, even God. She sings songs written in a language not her own, to a rhythm, not born from her people, in a building where the drums of her ancestors are called demonic. She is present but not seen. She is faithful but disconnected. This is what happens when spiritual colonization becomes internalized. The disconnection goes deeper than doctrine. It touches the body. In traditional African spirituality, the body is divine. Movement is worship. Emotion is sacred. Sexuality is not shame. It is rhythm, power, and life. But in the imported model, the body became a problem, a temptation, a thing to be hidden, punished, denied. Instead of dancing before God, people were told to sit quietly. Instead of honoring the mother, spirit, they were taught to fear the serpent. Instead of pouring water to speak with the ancestors, they were told to forget them. This was not enlightenment. It was erasure. And the pain of that erasure still lingers. Ask yourself, why are so many Black people today spiritually hungry, yet hesitant? Why do so many feel out of place in the very spaces they're told are sacred? Because deep down their spirit remembers something else, something older, something freer. It remembers a time when the divine was not foreign or far away. It was close, personal, familiar. This disconnect, the tearing away of Black people from their own spirituality, was one of the most violent acts ever done to the soul. It told entire generations, God is not welcome here. Your culture is not holy. Your image is not divine. And even now, centuries later, we still carry the weight of that message. So how do we heal? We begin by remembering. We begin by questioning what we were taught to forget. We ask ourselves, why was my ancestors' ritual called evil? Why was my grandmother's wisdom dismissed as superstition? Why does holiness only look like Europe? Why does faith feel so far from my own skin? These aren't just questions. They are keys. Each one unlocks a door that leads us back to the sacred center, to the rhythm of our people, to the truth we never truly lost. So if you've ever felt spiritually homeless, if you've ever wondered why you love God but feel disconnected from church, if you've ever felt that your soul speaks in a language older than your sermons, you're not alone. And you're not broken. You are remembering. So comment below, I am healing my roots, or my spirituality is not a sin. Let this be the place where shame ends. In part 6, we'll go beyond remembering. We'll reclaim. We'll explore how to reconnect with ancestral spirituality practically, personally, powerfully, and how the sacred has always lived in you, no matter how far you were told to run from it. So now we remember. We remember the gods, the names, the rituals, the severing. But memory alone isn't enough. Now we return. Not to superstition, not to some museum of lost beliefs, but to something living, breathing, waiting for you. Because your ancestors didn't vanish, they speak through your heartbeat. Because the divine didn't leave, it moved inward. The question now is simple. How do we reconnect with what was taken? Let's start here. So many of us still whisper when we speak of our heritage, still flinch when we hear drums, still hesitate before lighting a candle, pouring water, or saying a prayer in the language of our grandmother. Why? Because we were told, generation after generation that these acts were evil, that anything not sanctioned by colonized religion was dark, dangerous, or of the devil. But that was a lie. You don't need permission to pray like your ancestors did. You don't need a building to find the divine. You don't need a middleman to speak to spirit. All you need is presence and memory. Let's talk practice. Reclaiming ancestral spirituality doesn't mean copying rituals out of fear of performance. It means listening to the earth, to the body, to the stories still told in kitchens, during lullabies, or in the silence after loss. Here's where you can begin. 1. Listen to your body. Your body remembers what your mind forgot. When you move, when you breathe, when you sing in a rhythm that isn't Western, it is not rebellion. It's a return. 2. Create sacred space. It doesn't need marble or gold. It can be a corner of your room, a table, a tree. Place there something meaningful, a photo, a bowl of water, a candle, a feather, a fruit. Something that says, I am present with the sacred. 3. Honor your ancestors. Speak their names aloud. Pour water as you do. Say, I remember you. I carry you. Guide me. This is not idolatry. It's legacy. Well, use your voice. Sing. Chant. Even if no one taught you the words, your soul knows the melody. Spirituality begins where your spirit starts to stir. 5. Learn with humility. Read. Study. Listen. Not from those who mock your past, but from those who've preserved it, often in quiet, humble circles. Find the elders, the herbalists, the drummers, the poets. They are the keepers of keys. And most of all, 6. Trust your instinct. You don't need a PhD in theology to know when something resonates. If it brings peace, presence, grounding, and love, it's sacred. You see, true Black spirituality was never about domination. It was never about guilt, fear, or eternal punishment. It was about balance, harmony with the land, with the body, with the divine within. It didn't ask you to abandon your culture. It was your culture. It didn't make you small. It made you whole. And the best part? It's still here. Even after centuries of fire, sword, exile, and shame survived. It survived in cooking pots, in folk stories, in healing songs, in quiet tears. In the moment your grandmother placed her hand on your head and whispered something not from the Bible, but from her bones. That was a blessing. You are here because something inside you knows there's more. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to prove it. Just acknowledge it. Comment below, I'm returning to my sacred self, or my spirit remembers, because this is not about rebellion. It's about reunion. Reunion with the sacred, with yourself, with the face of God that looks like your reflection. And when enough of us remember, something shifts in the spirit of the world. In part 7, we'll close this journey with the greatest revelation of all, that returning to ancestral faith isn't just about the past, it's the key to our future, our healing, our power. We began with a question, what if God looked like you? And now we arrive at the answer. Because this is no longer about mythology. It's not about statues or temples buried beneath the sand. This is about memory, identity, freedom, spiritual freedom. When you remember that the divine once wore your face, spoke your language, and moved to your rhythm, something awakens inside you. Not just pride, but power. Because when a people believe God looks like them, lives among them, breathes through them, they stop asking for permission to exist. They walk taller, sing louder, pray deeper, resist longer. And that's what was feared all along. Not the gods themselves, but what they meant to you. Because a people who know their God looks like them cannot be enslaved. A people whose ancestors danced with the divine cannot be spiritually silenced. A people whose bodies are temples don't kneel to shame. This awakening, it's not academic. It's not just about unlearning. It's about becoming whole again. For centuries, Black people around the world were told their worth had to be earned. That holiness was foreign. That salvation required erasing their culture, their language, their roots. But that lie is dying now. Because what colonization tried to cut off wasn't destroyed. It was preserved. In the breath of grandmothers, in the beat of resistance songs, in hidden ceremonies, in sacred names that refuse to be forgotten. Those names are rising again, not to fight a war of gods, but to remind us that our spirit was never broken, that our silence was never consent, that our absence in stained glass wasn't proof of distance from God. It was evidence of the system's fear. So now we speak. Now we sing. Now we remember. Not just for ourselves, but for our children and for their children. So they'll never have to ask, where was God for people like me? They'll know. They'll see God in their own reflection, in their own story, in their own sacred skin. And this, my friend, is what the entire journey was leading to: reclamation. Not just of names like Amun-Ra, Isis Ma'at, but of your birthright. Because spirituality is not a tool of guilt. It is not a cage of fear. It is not a doctrine handed down by conquerors. It is a rhythm, a memory, a fire. And it's been burning inside you all along. If you felt it stir through this journey in your chest, in your breath, in your dreams, that's not coincidence. That's your soul remembering. Remembering that you are not spiritually broken. You are not cut off. You are not lost. You were dormant. And now you are waking up, waking to the truth that the divine is not far away or foreign. It is in your walk, your weeping, your music, your lineage. So now I ask you, will you return? Will you reclaim what was stolen? What was renamed, what was wrapped in shame and called evil just because it was powerful? Will you look in the mirror and say, God looks like me? Because when you say that, you're not just talking to yourself. You're talking to generations who were silenced and are now rising. So comment below, I woke up, or the divine is in me. Let your voice echo across this digital space like a drumbeat from the ancestors. Let this be more than a video. Let it be a ceremony. And as we close this journey, know this: the gods you were told to forget never forgot you. They've been waiting, and now the forgotten are being remembered. The erased are being spoken. And the people who lost their reflection in the image of God are seeing clearly again. This is not the end. It's the beginning. The beginning of a world where we don't need to ask if our skin is sacred, where the sacred is not European but default, where temples are not built just in stone but in the soul. This is the return to original faith, not because it's fashionable, not because it's rebellion, but because it is truth, a truth you now carry. So walk with it, speak it, sing it, share it, and may you never forget again. Thank you for walking this journey. If this series has awakened something deep in you, please share it. Let it reach someone else still searching. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, comment, and declare, I remember. I return. I rise.